And before we begin this subject, these are things that I heard from my spiritual guides and teachers, and some of the subjects are a little bit complicated, and I'm trying to represent them as best as I can. And I'd just like to offer my respects to those personalities that have inspired me and ask for their blessings to be able to speak on this subject of decisions and destiny, karma. So we're going to cover like a few different topics today. What is karma? It's a little video here. You can see some synonyms are there. Providence, fate, destiny. So what is karma? Karma, how does it act? Some questions that we will try to approach in today's class. I like this video because you see karma is kind of complicated. There's cause and effect, and things happen in sequences, in relationships, and sometimes we're not able to directly perceive, what started it, how did it happen. Karma is a very complicated subject matter, but pretty much to summarize in a nutshell, karma is the law of cause and effect which governs all actions and reactions in the world. So karma is an accumulation. Essentially, we can boil it down to three things. There's the accumulated karma of our past lives. There's the karma that's from our past acting right now, in the present. And then the things that we're doing right now, they're creating karma in the future. So there's three. There's the accumulation from the past, which is acting right now, which is creating future karma. There's a beautiful verse from the Bhagavad-gita. Purusha prakriti stohi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sad asad yoni janmasu. And we have this picture of the Ferris wheel. Bhagavad-gita is saying that the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of material nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species of life. So we're going to unpack this verse a little bit, but I would encourage you all to take note of the verse and go and read the purport by Srila Prabhupada, because he explains it very nicely. And try to remember this little Ferris wheel. Prakritista. So basically the living entity is situated in the material energy. So hopefully some of you have touched Krishna consciousness before, and you understand that the living being, spiritual by nature, but in touch with the material energy. So we're the soul trying to enjoy this world. If you saw this little bug on this Venus flytrap, because of our association with the modes of material nature, the soul is taking birth again and again. Prakriti sta, it means fixed in the material energy. So it's a very peculiar situation for the living entity, because we're spiritual by nature, and we understand according to the Bhagavad-gita, the soul is eternal by nature. But what happens, we're placed in an environment that's temporary. All around us we see things are temporary, that over time they're destructing, they're falling down, breaking, but the soul is eternal. Therefore it's a state of anxiety for the living entity. The living being is in a state of anxiety because we're eternal by nature, placed in a temporary environment. And based on our association with the material energy, sometimes we're appearing in different species of life. Not sometimes, all the time. So there's these bubbles you can see. Because all the things in this world, whether they're bugs, whether they're big empires and civilizations, they're just like bubbles in the ocean. Bubbles in the ocean, sometimes they're there for a short time and then they disappear. So all these big civilizations, these big empires that come and go, they're just bubbles in the ocean in relationship to material time. Relative to the same way we have insects, they're born and die on the same day, or in the same days or weeks. It's the same, they're just bubbles in the ocean. This is how it is in the material world. And the living beings, they're broken down into 8,400,000 different species of life, according to the Vedas. We have the human species, four-legged animals, birds, insects and reptiles, trees and plants, and aquatics. And it's mentioned that the human form of life is specifically meant for the cultivation of spiritual life. But based on the way that we associate with the material energy, we can go to any of these forms of life. And this is a point that we're going to unpack. This is based on how we associate with the modes of material nature. So there's three modes of material nature. There's sattva, which is goodness, which is associated with dharma, truthfulness, cleanliness, austerity. And generally those in the mode of goodness who lead a very dharmic, wholesome, good life, generally they take their birth in the higher species, like the demigods and even beyond. This is possible through associating with the mode of goodness. Whereas those in the mode of passion, passion is generally associated with creation, whereas goodness is more associated with maintenance. But passion is very creative, very much attached to the fruits, like attached to the results of our work, and trying to enjoy in this world. And generally those in the mode of passion, they take birth among the human species of life. Where those in the mode of ignorance, they would be, very tamasic, darkness, aggressive, angry, taking intoxications, drugs, killing other living entities, eating flesh. These things are generally associated with the mode of ignorance. And these personalities associating with the mode of ignorance, they would take birth in the lower species of life. Like we saw in the previous slide, there's different humanoids, but then which includes, the demigods up and the humans, but then below there's so many species of life. So those who associate with the mode of ignorance, generally they will find themselves appearing amongst those species of life. So essentially it's based on choice, but it's not as simple as that. The living entity is situated in the three modes of material nature, this prakriti sta, as we read in the Bhagavad-gita. And depending on which mode of material nature we associate with, we have a corresponding experience, which means we have a corresponding life, a corresponding rebirth, a corresponding death, obviously. The body that we get, all of this is based on the way that we associate with the modes of material nature. So then we can ask ourselves the question, where are we going? Where are we going? Are we going higher? Are we going to the human form of life? Are we going to the lower species of life? And all of this is based on consciousness. And there's verses from the Bhagavad-gita in this presentation that we'll discuss as evidence for these. And of course there's so many species lower than the human being we can just, from our own imagination, imagine. But one of the points I want to communicate with this image, you have a gold chain, a gold cage, you have silver and a wooden or a bronze or whatever. Like you can understand in this world we give so much emphasis to gold and silver and different things, but in this situation each one is a cage. So in Krishna Consciousness we try to communicate that you may find yourself in a golden cage or a silver cage or whatever, but the point is you are caged, you are imprisoned. And the process of Krishna Consciousness, and actually the point of having the human form of life, is to break free from the cage. Therefore the idea is not to associate with the mode of goodness and find ourselves in the higher species with the demigods or even beyond. And it's also not to be in the human form of life, in this world doing things, building things, making empires or whatever. And of course we don't want to be in the lower species of life. We want to break free from the cage, and that is the great opportunity awarded to us in the human form of life. So in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, there's a beautiful sutra, like a small verse. Atyantara pinarmaha prakriti ya puryat. Purya means the filling in or filling out, means essentially the same thing, but the filling in of prakriti, which we're going to explain. But it means, another birth, another species, another existence, the filling in of nature. This is puryat. So the way that the material world works, according to the Vedic understanding, is it's like layers. If you imagine layers of a cake, different layers, from subtle to gross, which we'll explain. You have your most subtle elements it's easy for me to do it from gross up because I have it remembered in that order. You have earth, water, fire, air, ether. These are the gross elements. Ether means like air or space. And then you have the subtle elements is mind, intelligence, and false ego. And the connection between the gross and subtle elements, between ether and the mind, is called pran, or the life force. So this is the connection between the gross and subtle is the life force, or pran. Pran is the connection to the mind. And so we see like more subtle than the mind is the ego. And then more subtle is the chitta. And the chitta you can understand as the pre-egotistic mind. And this is very interesting that we're going to try to unpack. And actually the chitta, not more subtle than that, but there's you can say like the universal chitta or the universal culmination of all the elements is known as the maha-tattva. And the maha-tattva, that's the culmination of all the material energies, elements. And like we had this cake, this picture of the cake, they filtered down to the gross reality that we see. And I'll give you an analogy to explain that. If you have milk, if you add a souring agent to milk, it turns into yogurt. And then if you take that yogurt and you churn it, you get butter. And if you take that butter and you heat it, you get ghee. So each stage has its own specific quality that are different from the previous one, yet ghee is milk, butter is milk, yogurt is milk, and milk obviously doesn't need to be explained, it's milk. So there's a grossification as you go down from each layer, and each element has a quality that is specific to itself, but still it's coming from the previous element. So this is a nice little meditation that all the elements of the universe are actually present within ourselves. So literally we are microcosms of the universe, and therefore you'll see many times in the Vedic perspective of reality, there's a very intimate relationship between the living entity and the world around us. So I want to try to unpack this concept of the Mahatattva a little bit, but it's not so easy to understand for me. I spoke about the Mahatattva and I spoke about the Chitta, and sometimes when I've been studying, they seem to be referring to the same thing. But my understanding is the Mahatattva is all the material elements, and then the Chitta generally refers to like you have a Chitta, like your Chitta. We have this verse famously given by Lord Chaitanya, Chitto Darpana Marjanam, which means cleansing the mirror of the heart, or cleansing the mirror of the consciousness, the Chitta. Chanting of the Hare Krishna maha-mantra, or the process of Bhakti Yoga, it's wiping away the dust. You can imagine the consciousness, the Chitta, it's like a mirror that's covered with dust. And if we have a mirror and we try to see our reflection and it's dusty, we'll get a distorted understanding of who we are. So this process of Bhakti Yoga is Chitto Darpana Marjanam. It's wiping away the cover of the dust on the Chitta, and then allowing us to understand who we really are as a spirit soul. So we have the Mahatattva as the most subtle, and then it goes through. We have the ego, we have the false ego, which is generally associated with misidentifying with the body. Then the mind, intelligence, senses, space, air, fire, water, and earth. So here we are in this world. We have like earthly elements, our bodies is earth and water and, gross elements. And therefore we're seeing everything happening on this world, and we're not able to penetrate through and understand that these things are filtering down from the most subtle elements of the universe. And there's a unique connection between these subtle elements and us here in this reality. And this is how karma is working, and we're going to explain it a little bit, or we're going to try to explain it. So your chitta and the mahatattva, they have impressions. Anardi Bahimukha is a Sanskrit verse that's saying, Anardi, from a time without beginning, Bahimukha, we've been conditioned in the material world. That since time immemorial, the living being has had these impressions in the consciousness, in the mahatattva and in the chitta. So how does it work? How is it that impressions get stored in the chitta and the mahatattva? So we have two cameras that are going all the time, these two eyes. They're like cameras, recording everything. And these leave impressions in the chitta. And the chitta, you can understand, it's like the impressions of your reality get imprinted on the chitta, and then the mahatattva is like the collective of all the universe, all the living beings, everything. All these impressions, they're stored in the mahatattva. So how do these impressions work? So what happens is, through our activities and behavior and experience, these two cameras that are seeing everything, they leave impressions. Like this lady walking on the sand. If you walk in sand and it's wet, you leave these footprints. They leave impressions on the sand. So what happens if you come with, we call it plaster of Paris, and you fill it in, like, when you break your arm, you get this cast. It's made of plaster of Paris. So here we have, this, iron, whatever, some liquid metal or blowing glass. Like, we have a mold, and then we're filling in this mold. So the way that it works is, as you go about your reality, you're making impressions in the chitta. And what happens is, this is Puryat from this Patanajli Yoga Sutra. This is the filling in of material energy. What happens is, you leave impressions, and then material energy fills into the impressions, and that is your next reality. So we have this statue, like a filling in, or this one is like a robot. The filling in of the material energy. So this makes us have some questions about destiny and choice and free will. Like, how does it work? Like, if we're leaving impressions and then the material energy is coming in, like, are we free to make our own choices? Are we free to, we're creating our own destiny, but how does it work? So what happens when we come to a road, like this guy, he's come to, like, if we come to a fork in a road and we want to turn left or we want to turn right, what happens is, we come to this situation, and then we wait for a decision to come up in our consciousness. We wait for something to come into the mind and help us make a decision. And therefore sometimes we find ourselves like, what should we do? Should we go to the beach? Should we go to the cinema? Should we go to the temple, or associate with transcendentalists and spiritualists and try to understand like who we are, where we come from? How does it work? So the way that it works is, these impressions, they're like echoes in the consciousness. So based on things that we've done in the past, the way that we've behaved in the past, we have these impressions that then filter down through the chitta into our consciousness, and we make decisions based on that. But this is very interesting. Like, we have this this is like trying to express how we have like all these impressions in the consciousness from so many lifetimes, that essentially is, forcing us to act based on things that we've done in the past. But the very unique thing about our position is, based on the ego, based on this identification with the self, our subjective experience, we think that we're making decisions in real time. But actually, these are decisions that are being made for us based on the impressions of the past. And that's why I put this picture of the robot before, because it's like, do we have free will, or are we just behaving according to things that have happened in the past based on our association with the material energy. And therefore Bhagavad-gita is explaining to us about how actually we're simply acting based on the way that the material energy is associating with us. So this is supposed to be some guy dancing with puppets. How does it work with the material energy? Pretty much you can see, I wanted to find like a picture of a bull with a ring around his nose being led around, because pretty much for the conditioned living soul, this is the situation. So you can see the horse is just leading us around. Or if any of you have a copy of the Bhagavad-gita from the BBT edition, they have this picture of the chariot, and you have like the on the back, the passenger of the chariot. He's just there freaking out, and the chariot represents the mind, and the reins is the body, and the reins are the senses, and it's just being carried around helplessly. Therefore Bhagavad-gita has this very beautiful verse, one of my favorite verses. Prakriti kriyayamani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudadma kataham iti manyate. That the bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks he's the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by the material modes of nature. So ahankara means the false ego. So the conditioned living being, he thinks that he's making decisions, but actually all of this is carried out by the modes of material nature, which means that the karma that we have in the past, the modes of material nature, the way it's influenced in the past, the impressions that we made on the sand, and then the puriyat, the filling in of material nature, filtering down through the chitta based on these impressions, is forcing us to act here and now. So more or less, for the majority of living beings within this material world, they are simply forced to act based on the material energy pushing them to behave in certain ways. And due to ahankara, due to false ego, we're subjectively thinking we're free, but actually we're not. We're just slaves to the material energy and slaves to our own mind and senses based on impressions from the past, which is very profound if you think about it. So there's another verse from the Bhagavad-gita. Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyata tattvavit pashan shrinvan sprishan jigran ashnan gachan swapan swasan. So, someone who is a transcendentalist, a person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged and they're with their objects, and that he is aloof from them. So essentially, we're trying to make two distinctions here. One is the conditioned living being, influenced by the modes of material nature, and one is the material nature. Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the beautiful Bhakti Shastras, it describes three states of consciousness for the living being. There's wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. And it's not so easy to unpack it, like it's a whole seminar essentially, but wakefulness you can also understand, dreaming you can also understand, we dream when we go to sleep, and then deep sleep is like, you know, we wake up in the morning, oh man, I had such a nice sleep, you know, you just, deep sleep. Three states of consciousness. But the thing is, if you take a step back, the soul, or the living entity, is observing these three states of consciousness. We're either in wakefulness, we're either dreaming, or we're in deep sleep. But the thing is, when we're in deep sleep, we're not, you know, cut off from everything, because we have a memory, we remember having the state of deep sleep. So actually the soul is just a witness of these three states of consciousness. And therefore the transcendentalist, he's able to understand how he's situated within the body as a witness, and all of these things are happening around. And this is called Shakshitva. Shakshitva, Shakshi means witness. You may know this story of Shakshi Gopal. It's a deity that acted as a witness. So like waves going around the ocean, Shakshitva means you can see all the material elements, your mind and everything going all around you. But actually you're a little bit detached. And it's mentioned that this state of Shakshitva, witnesshood, is the state in which we need to practice devotional service. Because the way that it works with Krishna consciousness, with Bhakti Yoga, is this Bhakti, this spiritual energy, the internal potency of divinity of Krishna, this Bhakti Shakti, we want this Bhakti Shakti to descend and act through us. If we're practicing Krishna consciousness, thinking it's all about me, my kirtan, my service, me, I and mine, this and that, ahamameti. If we're practicing Krishna consciousness in a state of this is actually not, this is not a situation where Bhakti can descend and act through us. Actually, pure Bhakti, there's one verse, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmat anavritam, which means essentially that Bhakti is when the only desire is to give pleasure to Krishna and is free from karma and jnana. So some karma is required, not karma in the sense how we've been discussing in this presentation. Karma in the sense like, we have to do activities in this world. We have to feed our bodies, we need to use the bathroom, so many things we have to do, we cannot avoid it. But karma would be an obstacle for Bhakti if we're attached to the fruits of our... If we're doing things because we want a result and we want the result for ourselves. And similarly, Gyan, knowledge is also required. This presentation itself is knowledge, right? But some knowledge is not favorable for Bhakti. Some knowledge will block this opportunity for Bhakti to descend. For example, knowledge of the absolute truth being impersonal, the impersonal Brahman. This would be an obstacle for pure devotion. Because we understand in Krishna consciousness there's 3 levels of realization, three aspects of the one absolute truth. The first being Brahman, the all-pervasive oneness. I'm you, you're me, we're all one, we're all consciousness, it's all spiritual, everything's energy. But then those who are on the path of yoga, they also understand that if you penetrate through this realization of Brahman, there's the localized Paramatma in the heart. God as a person, the soul of your soul. Paramatma, Atma, the soul. Paramatma, the supreme soul, the soul of your soul, Paramatma. There's localized God in the heart, divinity in the heart. And based on our practice, based on our sadhana, one who's practicing yoga with the gyan or the understanding that the impersonal conception of divinity is the highest stage of realization, or the most desirable stage of realization. Such a personality, if they're doing yoga, when they realize Paramatma in the heart, based on their sadhana or their practice, they will see Paramatma and they will think, yes, this is me. And then they will merge into it and become one. This is Brahman realization. Whereas one who's a bhakta or a devotee, when they see Paramatma in the heart, they understand, yes, this is my Lord, let me engage in service. And then you enter into the conception of Bhagavan, which is the Supreme Personality of Godhead with His name, His form, His activities, paraphernalia, pastimes like this. And so in Krishna consciousness, we encourage this level of realization as the highest, most desirable goal. And that's because in this Bhagavan conception, there's an exchange of love. There's exchange. Whereas in the impersonal conception, there's nothing. You don't exist anymore. Nothing exists, just oneness. So for the bhakta, we aspire to enter into this realization of Bhagavan, because this allows for the most unique flow of experience and rasa and relationship. So we were speaking about this state of shakshitva and how this is the state, this state of witnesshood is the way to practice Krishna consciousness ideally. So how can we practically, how can we practically take something from that? Like, you're like, or you're telling me, okay, first of all, you're explaining that we're like slaves to the material energy, which means, pretty much from what you're saying, it sounds like you're saying we don't have any free will. There's nothing we can do. We're pretty much stuck. We're just, the material modes are acting through us, and then, we're like stuck in this world. And then you're saying, but for the transcendentalist, he's removed from all this and he's just witnessing everything. And then you're saying, hey, you should practice Krishna consciousness in this state of being. So what's the practical thing to take away from this? The point is, when we sit on our launch pad to chant the Hare Krishna maha-mantra or engage in spiritual activities, we should be in the mood of requesting this Bhakti Shakti, or this internal potency of the divine, to descend and act through us. Srila Prabhupada, he defined the Hare Krishna maha-mantra as, O Krishna, O energy of Krishna, please engage me in your devotional service. But we can have this mood of prayer that we want this spiritual energy to descend and act through us, and then our senses become an offering back to divinity. So in the same way you take iron and you put it in fire, it takes on the qualities of fire, it acts like fire even though it's iron. Similarly, we may be in this material world, we may have this material body, but if the spiritual energy acts through us and we connect with it, we also, everything becomes spiritualized, and we're actually from that level able to connect with divinity, connect with the supreme spiritual reality. And that's the way that we break free from the connection to this material world. Like we were talking about the modes of material nature acting and then forcing us to act. Prakriti kriyana gunai kumani sarvashaha. That the material energy is forcing us to act, even though subjectively we think that we're acting, but actually the material energy is acting through us. So similarly, but also different, we want the spiritual energy to act through us, and we become instruments of that divine will. And this is the process for breaking free from this samsara, this cycle of birth and death, is to connect with this divine energy and become an instrument of its free will. And then the material energy cannot touch us anymore. It's like where there is light, there cannot be darkness. So similarly, where's the spiritual energy? There cannot be the material energy. So this is the mood in which we should be practicing Krishna consciousness, trying to connect with this spiritual energy. And that's what the Hare Krishna maha-mantra is. This Hare Krishna maha-mantra is coming from that place. It is descending from that place. And even though, it's vibrating on our tongues, and we have this material fleshy body, but the point is, by connecting with this sound vibration, which is not of this world, this is gradually Chaturdarpanamaj, and we spoke about cleansing the mirror of the heart. This is gradually wiping away this connection with the material world, allowing us to connect with the spiritual world. And that's the whole point of sadhana. That's the whole practice of sadhana. Sadhana means like a daily practice. And it's mentioned that the living being, us, we're in a very particular situation where we're situated in the middle of the spiritual and material energies. It's called tatashta. Literally, the tatashta shakti is the substance that we're made of. It's the position that we're in. So it's mentioned there's three divine energies. There's the antaranga shakti, which is the divine spiritual energy. There's the tatashta shakti, which is the marginal potency, and there's the bahiranga, the external energy of the material world. So the tatashta shakti, this is the position that we're in, where we're caught in the middle of the material and the spiritual. The tata, in Sanskrit, it refers to the border. If you imagine a river or a lake or a beach, where the land and the water touch, this is called the tata. So this tata, it's not really a geographical location. It's not really a physical place. It's more of a conception, because it's land and then it's water. But still, the Vedic understanding explained this situation, the tata, the juncture, it's the meeting point. And so the unique position of the living, to touch the Shakti, the living Jiva in this world, is that we're caught in the middle of matter and spirit. And for those of us who are on the spiritual path and we're trying to elevate ourselves through the practice of some transcendental activities, especially Krishna consciousness, we find in our day-to-day life, we'll find many situations where, we have to choose between Krishna and Maya, or between spirit and matter. Many times in a day, if you just reflect on your life, you'll find that this is the choice that we have to make again and again, because this is the position of the living being. This is where we're situated in the middle of matter and spirit. And therefore the process of sadhana is where we turn our attention away from matter towards spirit. This is the process of sadhana. So then how does it work? We've explained that, we're kind of trapped by the material energy, forced to act, from unlimited karma from our past is causing us to have reactions now and experience things now, which is creating impressions that are basing us in the future. And we think we're making decisions, but actually we're forced to act by material nature. We're forced to act. So then how to go from that position of being forced to act and trapped within samsara, the cycle of birth and death, to being liberated or, being situated in the spiritual energy. So this is a very unique situation where actually what's required is that spiritual energy has to come down and connect with you. And that happens through the via medium of the bhakta, or the pure devotee, the guru, the spiritual master. This is how the conditioned living being gets in touch with the spiritual energy, and then is given the opportunity and the facility and the transcendental knowledge to then rise above. So we need the association of those personalities who are in touch with the spiritual energy. The spiritual energy and the material energy, they don't mix. There has to be a via medium. And therefore it's very important that we actively seek out and very determinedly seek out the association of pure devotees, of spiritualists, of transcendentalists, so that we can have the connection with the spiritual energy that will help us break free from this cycle of the material energy. Because if we come into contact with the devotees, if we come into contact with those who are purely chanting the Hare Krishna maha-mantra, which is transcendental, this will give us the nudge to be able to break free from the material energy. But because we have so many impressions from our past, almost unlimited, it's very difficult for us. And therefore maybe you'll see, like in your life, in your day, you set out to do something spiritual. You set out to to do more spiritual activities, to do better chanting, to be improved, to do better, and then very quickly you find yourself getting derailed. Many times it happens to me, and I'm going to listen to a lecture now. I have some time. I'm going to listen to a lecture. I'm going to take notes. So I'm going on the internet and I'm looking for some lecture, and then before I know it, I'm watching something completely different, or I'm on something else, or I'm on shorts or whatever, and then time is going, and then I realize my God, what happened? And that's because impressions from the past come in and then derail us. That's why Krishna Consciousness is always recommending a sadhana, a daily practice, and this sadhana has to be increased over time. Every day we're sitting and chanting Hare Krishna maha-mantra every day, and there's other limbs of bhakti, there's other ways of practicing Krishna consciousness or connecting with the spiritual energy, but the Hare Krishna maha-mantra is considered to be the most accessible and simplest, easiest process for connecting with the spiritual energy. And because the material energy is always there and it's always acting on us, it requires day after day, diligently, very much dedicated, connecting with the spiritual energy again and again and again, because we have so many impressions from the past. We have things that are happening all around us now, and therefore it's not so easy for us. So it's very important that we constantly try to associate with the spiritual energy, and also create impressions like impressions of bhakti that are very favorable for the future. We should be cautious to be behaving in a way that's creating impressions that's going to make us bound again in the material world. Whereas if we're performing activities of Krishna consciousness, not only is it not making impressions, it's removing past impressions. There's a very beautiful conversation between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Roy. You might be familiar with these names or not, but you should understand they're both very prominent personalities in Bhakti Yoga, in Krishna consciousness. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he asked this question, like, who's the best capitalist? Who's the best businessman? And Ramananda Roy, he replied, the greatest businessman, the best capitalist, is the Bhakta. Why? Because they take this material body, this fleshy material body, which has no value because it's temporary. After some time, just like the butterflies and the bugs that are born for some days or weeks and then they die, or like the empires that came and went, like the bubbles in the ocean, this body will finish. It has no value. But they engage it in the process of Krishna consciousness, and what is the result? You get an eternal spiritual body. Because a great capitalist is someone who, they take something at a very low cost and then they sell it for a profit. So similarly, we're taking this material body which has no value, engaging it in the process of Krishna consciousness, and what is the result? You get a spiritual body. So therefore we should be very hungry to associate with pure devotees, transcendentalists, because this will allow us to break free from this connection with the material energy. And this, you can imagine you have two wires, right? One is two copper wires. One is having 20,000 volts and one is having nothing. If you touch the 20,000 volts ones, you're going to get zapped and you're going to die. So externally to someone who doesn't have knowledge, someone who's a transcendentalist, a pure devotee, they may be acting in this world. It may seem like they're doing so many things, but actually they're completely free from the influence of this material energy, and the spiritual energy is acting through them. Like we spoke about this verse from the Bhagavad-gita, where it's talking about, someone who's in this state of shakshitva, they're just witnessing everything. But to us externally, they may seem like just a normal person, or they may seem like just any other person, but actually the consciousness is completely different. And that's why, Bhakti Yoga is so powerful, because it gives us the facility to act within this world. We do things within this world, but with the transcendental consciousness, with the connection to Krishna. These activities are not creating karma, they're not creating impressions. Actually, they're elevating us beyond this material world. So, we tried to cover a lot of topics in this seminar. We spoke about the material elements filtering down. So you have your most gross elements. You have the maha-tattva and the chitta through the ego, the intelligence, the mind, and then the gross elements, and how karma is working in such a way that we're doing things in this world. It's creating impressions, and then the material energy is filling in, and that's what's creating another birth, another life, our destiny. Prakriti, Krina, Mani, Guna, Karmani, Sarvashad, that the material energy is forcing us to behave in these ways. However, the way we break free from these modes of material nature, and we spoke about the gold cage, the silver cage, bronze cage, whatever. We don't want to be stuck in the mode of goodness. Like, mode of goodness is good as a platform to practice spiritual life, but we don't want to have the material modes. We don't want to be in the material modes. We don't want to go up or down. We want to break free. And the way that happens is through the associating with bhaktis, with the bhakti shakti, with the spiritual energy. So therefore, when we associate with the bhaktis, when we associate with the spiritual energy, and the way that we recommend the most, the way that the self-realized souls, especially in this process of this line of teachers of Bhakti Yoga, Krishna Consciousness, is through the chanting of the Hare Krishna maha-mantra. This will keep you connected to the spiritual energy. And I just wanted to share one last personal reflection on this point before we stop, is that, some years ago, when I was living as a monk, as a brahmachari, I was chanting a lot, very early in the morning for many, many hours. Whereas these days, my life is different. I'm working, I have duties in this world, my focus is out in the world. And therefore, many times the material energy, it comes and it just like, wow, you're just caught in it. The waves of the material energy, it's just, helplessly you're forced to act. And these last days I was reflecting so much, like, how is it that, I'm so helplessly influenced by the material energy? And, I was reflecting that before, for many, many hours, for many days and weeks and years, I was, all the time trying to associate with the material energy. And what that did is it created a bit of a gap between the material and myself. Like when the waves of the material energy came, like we had this picture of the waves, you can imagine the waves are coming, you're able to a little bit disassociate with it. Whereas, these days, like, I'm not chanting as much as I was, I'm not like doing as much as I was because I have responsibilities in this world. And therefore I'm able to see how the material energy is taking me. When these waves come, I'm kind of riding them and get caught up in them. So I have some experience of how, if we're very much strongly associating with the spiritual energy very diligently, this does create a disconnect between the modes of material nature and ourselves, and we're able to not be so much influenced by the modes of material nature. When these impressions come up in the consciousness, we don't have to act. And therefore we're not creating new impressions in the future. So if we're not creating impressions in the future, there's nothing for the material energy to fill into. And therefore we don't take another birth, another life, another reality. Well, another reality is there, but not in the material world. We remain situated in the spiritual energy and no longer influenced by the material energy. And that is what the practice of Krishna consciousness is. So, yeah, we spoke many things. There was a lot of information there. We have about 7 minutes left. If anybody want to have something clarified, I don't blame you because I said a lot. If you have some question or some comment, you can put up your hand and say, or you can post in the chat. You can, whatever's comfortable for you. Otherwise, we can finish a little bit early. I want to thank you all for your attention, for your patience. I hope it was something educational there. So if anybody want to say anything, please don't hesitate, don't be shy. Otherwise, I said when I was promoting the event, we would do a little bit of kirtan at the end. But it's 9 o'clock here, and I have a accordion, it's really loud, and I don't want to upset the neighbors. Mamata said thank you, it was really good. Yeah, I think there are some things that I wanted to say that didn't come out because there's so much information. I would have liked to spend more time on trying to understand the relationship between the Mahatattva and this world, because it's a little bit complicated. Like there's the chitta is there, which is kind of our own impressions, but there's also impressions from the Mahatattva, like the universe. For example, it's not just our impressions that is shaping the reality, of course. There's also a collective, and that's in the Mahatattva. So you see, for example, yeah, I'll be quiet after this. I'll be quiet. It might be our destiny to discover some wealth, which means, maybe we find like some buried treasure, right? Which it wasn't necessary. It may have been our destiny for whatever reason to find this treasure, but we didn't cause it to happen. Like the Mahatattva, the impressions filtered down and caused someone to go and bury this treasure, and then, through our destiny, the impressions filtered down into us, which caused us to dig and find it. So there's a very, intricate, complicated relationship between the material energy and our reality, but it is all connected. So. Priyanka, thank you so much. And Billy's got his hand up. Oh, I just told you to put it down. Please, you can speak. I can hear you, I hope.
Namaste, Urugaya Das. I do have a question about disconnecting from the material modes of nature and eventually breaking free from, like the analogy that you mentioned, the cage, whether it be a wooden, silver, gold cage. But you mentioned that at certain points, and this can happen to anybody, a seeker, may have times when they have more time to devote to spiritual life, and other times, it might vary depending on years, weeks, whatever is going on and duties they have. Over time, given that the amount of time will vary depending on the year or month or week, how are we able to eventually break free from those material modes if our amount of time goes up and down? In other words, is the merit accumulative, or does it go down once we stop?
Is the what accumulative?
Or start less time?
So I didn't hear the word. Is what accumulative?
Is the merit.
Merit.
Is the merit that we gain accumulative? In other words, is the value or benefit that we gain from the chanting and the sadhana accumulative, or does it go down or does it start going down because maybe we aren't able to chant a certain number of rounds?
It's a really good question. Actually, Arjun, he asked Krishna the same question in the Bhagavad-gita. He asked exactly the same question. And he talks about, I forget the Sanskrit, and there's some analogy about a riven cloud. Like he's saying, what if I do all this stuff, I'm doing all these spiritual things that you're talking about, but I don't become perfect. And then neither did I, enjoy this world, and neither did I get spiritual perfection. But Krishna explains that actually everything you do on a spiritual platform, it accumulates. You never lose it. He says there's no loss. There's no loss. And that's why in Krishna Consciousness, it's all optimism, no pessimism, only gain, no loss. So all the spiritual things that we do, it accumulates. And therefore, even the smallest thing, it's actually helping us in the future. So say we may practice Krishna Consciousness for 5 years, and then for some reason we just give it up. But that 5 years of Krishna Consciousness is from what I've understood and what I've heard, is removing lifetimes of karma. And actually in your future destination, when the material nature fills in, you'll be placed in a situation where you continue from where you stopped. So I remember the Bhagavad-gita, it's mentioning that you either take birth in a family of spiritual practitioners, or you take birth in a family where you don't have any material problems, so that you don't have to, some people, they're worrying about how they're going to get food for the next day. If you're worrying about how you're going to get food for the next day, you can't practice spiritual life. You need to get food. So you'll be put in a situation where your mind is peaceful, your material necessities are taken care of, and you can focus on spiritual life. So it is accumulative. But the wonderful thing so you don't need to be worried about, not being able to do too much, or not being able to do enough. You don't need to worry about this. But the wonderful thing about Krishna Consciousness is it's really about the consciousness, which means, you may be doing so many things in this world. You may be taking your kids for swimming lessons, and you're not able to see the connection between that and breaking free from the cycle of birth and death and the material energy. But if your consciousness is fine-tuned, you can find a connection between that activity and Krishna in the spiritual world. Like you can understand, these are parts and parcels of divinity. They're parts and parcels of God. They're connected to Krishna, and I'm helping them. I'm serving them. Like you can make a connection through your consciousness that links you to the transcendental. So even though you may be doing something that seems very mundane, actually through this connection, you're connected to the spiritual energy. And this is why the Vedic aphorism, the most important thing is to always remember Krishna and never forget. Because if you're remembering Krishna, no matter what you're doing, everything is an opportunity for you to elevate your consciousness. Everything is an opportunity for you to go forward. Everything is a lesson. It's a chance to remember. It's a chance to connect. And of course, to be sitting in a temple and just chanting for hours and hours and hours and hours, that's going to be very powerful. Whereas to be doing something that seems very mundane, it's not so it may not be as favorable. But the truth is, if your consciousness is there, if your consciousness is searching for divinity, you'll find it in every single situation. Down to, I was listening to a lecture lately, so I know Mamata, he asked a question, but I was listening to a lecture lately, Prabhupada was saying, God is in your heart, Krishna is in your heart, but if you don't believe that, then when you drink water, just understand, Rasoham apsukunteya, that Krishna is the taste of water. This taste of water that's nourishing you, this is God. And he even goes on to say that like the alcoholic, when he's drinking his alcohol, if he understands this taste that I'm hankering for, this taste that I love, this taste is God, is Krishna, is divinity, this is also going to level up. So everything is an opportunity for you to connect with divinity. And this is the beautiful thing about Krishna consciousness, and why Krishna recommends it in the Bhagavad-gita, because, you know, he says, Arjuna says, Krishna, this yoga that you've recommended to me, it's not practical. I can't go to the forest and meditate. I'm a prince, I'm a family man, I have children. I can't just give up everything and go to the forest. And therefore Krishna says, yes, do your duties, but remember me. Do it for me. And that's even better than running away, in one sense. It's even better, it's easier. So that's why for this age, Krishna consciousness is recommended. And you know, you can chant in your mind, you can chant in the bathroom, you can chant on the bus. There's nothing stopping you from connecting. There's nothing stopping you from connecting. So I hope that satisfied you. There's a question from, unless you had a follow-up, Billy, or it's okay?
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mamata was asking, what is the difference between chitta and the mind? So chitta is the pre-egoistic mind. So chitta plus ego equals mind. So the mind is basically, you know, the mind will be combined with the misidentification with the body. You know, we think like, I'm an Australian, I'm a boy, I'm this many years old, these are my friends, this is my work. This is all ego. And this will play in the mind, like the impressions that come, that filter through the chitta, through the ego, will be like this. So like, you know, like some mundane example, like I'm on the bus, someone steps on my foot, and my mind goes, hey man, this guy is not good, you know, you should smash him or whatever. So based on the things that I've done before, the chitta, the impressions filter through, mixes with the ego, where I think like I'm very strong and very brave or whatever, I'm Australian, can fight people, and then therefore it's coming in the mind. So put simply, the mind, the chitta is the pre-egoistic mind. Chitta plus ego equals the mind. Both are subtle. Yeah, both are subtle, but chitta is more subtle. More subtle than the mind is the intelligence, and more subtle than the intelligence is the ego. And then pre-egoistic mind is the chitta, and then that's connected to the maha-tattva, which is the accumulation of all the material energies. So it's like the layers of the cake. It filters through down to this reality that we see today. And one point that I wanted to mention, us having individuality is not a disqualification for bhakti. So I'll just quickly finish with the story. If people need to go, I won't be upset. It's just that because we're over time already. Like, you may have heard of the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj, he was a 5-year-old boy. He wanted to sit on the lap of his father, and then his stepmother came and kicked him off, and then he ended up going to the forest and meditating on Vishnu because he met Narada Muni, pure devotee, and he became famous. The pole star, the most brilliant star in the sky, is Dhruva Loka. So anyway, Dhruva, cut the story short, Dhruva was a pure devotee. When Dhruva was grown up, he was the emperor of the world. His brother was killed by yakshas. And then Dhruva, he went and avenged the death of his brother, and he killed a bunch of yakshas. And there's a whole story where Lord Brahma and Shiva and Kuvera, they come, and Swayambhu Manu, whatever, I forget his name, Manu comes, and they tell him, stop, don't kill all these guys. First of all, it ties into karma, because he says, even this guy, it's not his fault. He's acting because of destiny. He has so many impressions from time immemorial that forced him to act in such a way that killed your brother, that actually he's not responsible. It's all happening through providence. That's one point that, as we spoke in the class. But the point that I wanted to make is that Dhruva Maharaj, he's a pure devotee. He saw the Lord in the heart. He's connected to God. He's the highest level of devotional service. He's in Bhagavatam. But he got angry and avenged the death of his brother. Why? Because he's a Kshatriya. Kshatriyas are passionate by nature, and it's their dharma, it's their duty to be proud and to, if you're the king of the world and someone kills your brother, you go and kill them, right? That's your job, that's your duty. But he was a pure devotee. So similarly, like if someone's a farmer and they become a pure devotee, or they are a pure devotee, they may talk like a farmer, they may dress like a farmer, they may do the work of a farmer, they may plow the fields, but love for God is in their heart. So individuality is not a disqualification for bhakti. We can still be individuals, we can still act in this world, we can still do things in this world, and that doesn't mean that pure love for God can't come in our heart. We can still maintain our individuality whilst practicing Krishna consciousness, but that has to be purified. It has to be, purified is the right word. So I just wanted to make that point. And with that, I think it's good to finish. Just a little bit of a, if any of you are here and you're not part of our Chant Now community, we have this website, chantnow.com. Please, we're always announcing live events and we're trying to do more and grow the community, and we have groups and questions and stuff. Please make an account and join our community. I'd be so grateful to see you all there. And if anybody has want to get in touch with me, this is my email. You can write to me. It's urugaya@chantnow.com. I would like to speak to you more. We also do this coaching where we meet like one-on-one. We can read together. We can, meet once a week and read together. We can chant together. We can do, whatever you like. We have this facility to help you. So yeah, thank you all so much. I'm really grateful for those of you who came. It's very sweet of you and very nice. And I spoke a lot of things. I hope some of it made sense, and I'm also trying to understand these things. So I always like to finish with the kirtan, but it's a little bit late and noisy. So I'm just going to chant 3 Hare Krishna maha-mantras, and wherever you are, you can also chant 3 Hare Krishna maha-mantras together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So please keep your ears open, check your inboxes for the next live event. I'm not sure what it's going to be or when it's going to be. I don't think this coming weekend because I'm a little bit busy, but let's see. And please get in touch if you like, and thank you all so much, and we'll see you somewhere sometime. Hare Krishna. I will close the event now. Gauranga.